what's good, people? Izzy Max here, back with a bunch of people. We are not having our normal weekly breakdowns. We are doing our Season 3 power ranking. This is going to be Week 4. So I'm just going to go roll call. Everybody say hello when you can. So first off, we got Hunter.
Hey, guys.
We got Dan.
How's it going?
We got Johnny.
Howdy.
We got Ryan.
Hello.
And that's it. So, and we got Matt as well.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So,
that's a more business. Okay.
So anyway,
This already has the energy.
This is going to be a mess. We have a lot of transitions, a lot of people talking. So we're just going to kind of start it off with the bottom of the power rankings. I will say that these were voted on by the 6 of us and taken the average vote. So running in at 14 is Toxic, and the speakers will be Matt and Ryan.
Okay, so starting off with Toxic, he's down here number 14, record 0-4 with a minus 19 differential. He's played against Dina, taking a game off of Dina, and then losing 0-2 to Charles, Hunter, and Jess here. He's made a transaction every week, dropping one fighting type for another in the Hitmonchan and Graplocked. He dropped the Reuniclus for another fighting type in Conkeldurr. Dropped the Graplock for Orbeetle as a Trick Room setter, probably because he had the Conkeldurr after that. And then he made what I think is his best trade out of the 4, dropping the Frostmoth for another Trick Room sweeper in Dragalge. So Ryan, do you want to go and take care of the pros here?
Yeah, so one of the first things that really stuck out to me that I really got to give Toxic huge props on, he's actually used Crocodile very well. I had Croc last season. I found it to be kind of a struggle to use. I had a difficult time with it. But man, especially in his first set against Dina, he used that thing like a pro. And he's done some cool stuff with it. I've been really impressed with the Crocodile. Also, he's actually done... there are some issues he's had in prepping his team on a weekly basis. However, one thing I've actually quite liked is his item choices. They're always very particular. Usually, and his team is actually quite built well, in which there's not a lot of things that want the same item. So he actually is getting away with these really nice, consistent weekly brings on his items. Been very good for him. So that's like kind of the biggest pros that I've seen that I've really liked.
And moving on to the cons, I've also emphasized the Crocodile a little bit. I do like his Crocodile usage as well, especially the Moxie Dynamax version against in his game against Charles. I like that quite a bit.
That was good.
The first con we have here is the transactions. Toxic seemed to... it seems like he's had a little bit of trouble getting a handle on his transactions. That's kind of... evident by the fact that he picked up and dropped Graplock without even using it. I know I'm one to talk on that, but we'll get to that when we get to that. He seems to be kind of struggling to put together sort of a Trick Room mode. The Graplock, like I said, makes him seem a little bit indecisive. I've talked about some of the issues with his draft overall in some of our weekly breakdown videos, so I won't go into too much detail about that. But I'd be concerned at this point, since we only have 3 transactions left, that he maybe doesn't have enough time to fix all of the holes on his team. I suppose I could be wrong about that. He could prove me wrong, and I hope he does. But it's something I'd be concerned about.
I do quite like the Dragalge, though. I want to emphasize that. The Dragalge is an amazing pickup, and I do not want to underplay that. That's a very, very, very good option. I was super excited to see it, too.
Right, and I think dropping Frostmoth was the right call. Frostmoth, I think, we got a little hyped up on Frostmoth, mostly because of how Maxwell used it in the previous season, and I think, personally, I think that ended up tiering it a little bit too high. I think it should probably be down in 4, but... anyway, moving on, we've got the next one, late season schedule. This is going to be a problem for Toxic, since he still has yet to pick up a win, and in the mid to late season, he is going to be playing a lot of top ranked players, and he's gonna have to play his ass off quite a bit in order to pick up a significant amount of wins there. So even though it's very early in the season, his late season schedule is going to be it's going to make it really hard for him to even make it into the wild card slot at this point.
Yeah, his out of conference is one of the, as of right now, one of the most difficult ones. Unless something drastic changes, his schedule's quite difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have Pokemon and set selection. I've noticed a few times. I think it's safe to say that in the first 3 weeks he kind of showed up to the battle with like a 5-mon team, mostly because the Shell Smash Blastoise against either a Clefable or a Gastrodon is virtually unbringable. And then I think it's safe to say the same thing about Frostmoth against a team that has 2 tier 1s with that are big Dynamax options that have stab super effective physical moves against it in the Thundurus and the Metagross. So that's just another thing I think he maybe needs to work on, just realizing when there's something on your opponent's team that hard counters one of your mons or a particular set on one of your mons. Maybe that's not the best thing to bring when it's very likely that you're going to see that mon. And then lastly, we've got win cons and move choice. This one I think was particularly evident in the matches against Dina and Jess. There were a couple of times when I felt like his move selection, maybe his targeting was a little bit not quite optimized. I thought that there were some times when he was clicking Max Phantasm on the Dragapult when he probably should have been going for Wormwind to get attack drops on the Cinderace. Game 3 against Dina, he had almost a guaranteed win condition if he had just targeted correctly, and his targeting was a little bit off, and it allowed Dina to take the win there. And then his game against Jess is pretty self-explanatory. So if you've seen that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But that should do it for the cons for Toxic.
Yeah. I will say, Toxic usually actually has a surprisingly good early game a lot of the time. Not always, but I've noticed in general, Toxic does quite well in the early game. He just has a hard time thinking, I think, sometimes ahead all the way to those late game scenarios, which is quite difficult to do, especially against some of the opponents he's been up against. But I think that ultimately is what has really hurt his season the most overall. And I don't think his team really lends itself well to having really quick games with the way it's currently built.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, any last words from anybody else? Okay, we will be moving on to number 13 is Grant, and that will be Dan and Johnny.
Hey there, folks. So Grant, he's got a 0-3 season so far, and he's got negative 17 differential. Went up against Dark, and got a -5 there. His second week was the bye week, and then he went up against Maxwell, Izzy Max, and then Ryan. So far, he hasn't made any transactions to his team, and that's how the season's going pretty well for him. So far, he's doing okay. I like some of the things that he's doing, and it's nice to see a new player, at least to me. Was he in season 2? Does anyone know? I don't.
No.
Okay, yeah. So it's great to see some new peeps around here and stuff like that. So, Grant, what do you have to say?
So,
not Grant. Sorry, Dan. We're talking.
Yeah, not a problem at all. So one thing that I've really noticed with Grant is at the beginning of most weeks, I'll play a match with him on Showdown. I'll just build a random team that he might be facing that week so he can try different mons and see how they match in and out of it. And he has shown a lot of obvious improvement in that, and I think that's been translating really well into his games. He's had some pretty interesting builds, like Assault Vest Azumarill, for example. I know he's run that once or twice, and it's been something that I think has gone really well into a lot of his matchups. So I think as a player, he's definitely improving over time. But I think in the long term, some things that he could work on in the future are threat recognition. Like, for example, this past week, Dynamax Licky Licky. You don't really expect, a belly drum Licky Licky to start going in against your team, but if you see that next to a redirector, it might need to be something that's on your mind. And then reacting to unplanned situations. Again, that Licky Licky is a great example, or the Max Tangrowth that he faced in week 3. He's just a newer player, and so he doesn't really have the experience reacting to these situations as they unfold that he hasn't really planned for. And I think it's a skill that he will be developing over time. And for him this season, I think this season's really going to hinge on whether that over time it's going to be caught up in the next couple weeks, or whether it's going to take the rest of the season, which I think either one could be viewed as a successful season for him. But based on the rate of improvement that I've seen and the level of the team that he has, I do think that he is a dark horse to make a run for playoffs out in the red division right now, because the red division is really wide open. So I think he's got that opportunity, even if he is still working on that threat recognition and reacting to situations that he wasn't expecting. But do you have anything else to add on to that, John?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think he's an up and coming player. For sure. Gosh, it's a good team composition, and we've seen some pretty good plays from him and stuff like that. The other thing I'd like to see is using his lower tiered bonds just for that unexpected or that surprise factor. Because looking at a sheet here with the kills and deaths and stuff, he hasn't used any of his lower mons. And of course, Steelix and Unpheasant and Double don't seem like that big a threat. But of course, like with Double, you could do like a Cotton Guard. I think that's what it is, where you do +3 with defense, and you can do body press and all kinds of silly stuff that can run off and get crazy. Or Unpheasant's got some cool stuff going on with it. But just exploring the team and not using standard things, or looking at its moveset and trying to bring something unpredicted. I think Grant could really prosper from that, exploring some of the movesets and stuff like that, because it's a pretty cool team, so there's a lot of potential here, which I really enjoy seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I think is really in his favor is that his schedule was very front-loaded. His 3 opponents that he's played so far have had a combined 2 losses between the 2 of them, between the 3 of them so far this season. So he's had a very front-loaded schedule, and as that begins to ease up some, I think it gives him the opportunity to, as he improves as a player and his opponents are generally weaker than the ones that he's played so far this season, I think that gives him a lot of opportunity to make that run late in the season and really start to grow as a player, which is going to be great for the league in the long term.
Oh yeah, definitely. And starting out with the hardest opponents is really nice, because then in comparison, everything's just kind of a cakewalk. You can you grow the most from getting defeated the worst, right? So especially going up against like Maxwell, as a second match, it's like, oh, okay, well, you can learn a lot from that, especially in terms of positioning and stuff like that. So I got my eye on Grant here.
Yeah, good stuff. Anybody for anything else? Okay, moving on. Number 12 is going to be Burst, and that's going to be covered by me and Hunter. So I'll go ahead and start off. Burst is now sitting at 1-2. Beating one of the undefeated teams last week at a -3. So his differential actually isn't bad for this early in the season. He led off facing me, got a -6. He played John, which was a really good match, kind of came down to the wire, picking up just a -1. And then he did play Dark, which was the undefeated coach, picking up a +4. He has a whole list of transactions that I'll just let y'all read there on screen. But some of the pros for this team is going into it, and I think after he played me, kind of knowing where the team that he drafted kind of lacked. And he's been trying to fix that slowly but surely, and I think he's fixed a couple of things. He has really cool type cores, with one mod in particular being that Magnezone that you see on screen. And then his speed control options are phenomenal, with the priority tailwind from the Talonflame, and also kind of building this Trick Room mode. But before I say any more, let's go ahead and hear what Hunter has to say.
Yeah, sure. One of the major cons that we noticed about Burst season was the top affinity usage and how they were using it. So I don't think, and I'm pretty sure I can attest to this for everybody here, but the affinity usage wasn't necessarily as potent as we thought it was going to be. And then another con that we noticed was the kind of lackluster transactions. And by lackluster, I mean a lot of them. They probably made perfect sense to Burst, but from a different perspective, not necessarily. Like we look around and Burst is really trying their best to try and make the best transactions possible for the week or like the future. As you guys can see, there's a whole list of transactions, including trading away a redirection for a ground type, which I mean, it was good, but there's a little bit of controversy there, I guess. And then another con that we noticed was the starting draft and how unconfident, I guess, Burst was in the starting draft because of all the transactions that they made. But overall, like Maxwell said, I think the type cores are just really really cool and great options for speed control with the Talonflame, I believe, with the priority tailwind, and going back on the knowing the type weaknesses thing, I think videos he's making pretty good points on his growth and how he needs to perform and how he needs to adjust to certain matchups and everything like that. But early on, he's had a pretty rough schedule, I have to say. I mean, going against top players in the division isn't necessarily easy, from a PR standpoint. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Maxwell, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, so reading this, I'm going to preface this for the rest of it. Starting draft doesn't mean like, oh, your starting draft was shit. It's just we're fitting it on the screen and we're going to break it down. So if anybody sees these and like, oh, wow, that's like rude, we're not meaning it in a rude way. It's just a talking point so we know it's there. But yeah, no, when we say starting draft, and Hunter kind of touched on this really well, we're not meaning like your draft was bad. We're meaning you're having to make a lot of changes to kind of fix what you know is a problem. And like I said, after Burst played me, there were problems, and they were rightfully picked out, and you can see through these transactions that they're starting to get fixed. But yeah, that's kind of it for me. Does anybody else have anything to say on Burst?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to comment that his win against Dark was actually quite impressive. That game was very well played. It was well done. I really liked a lot of what he brought. I thought it was very smart, very intelligent brings. He had a really solid game plan going in, and it was a big upset win. And it kind of he's currently the lowest of the coaches with one win, and I was personally debating that quite heavily, whether that was true, accurate, or not. However, to Burst, that win against Dark was extremely convincing. If you can get a couple more of those, next PRs are going to be shooting up quite a bit, I think.
And
so I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, no, good point. And on top of that, if this -1 win against John, or -1 loss against John, was a +1 win, he might be in the top 6, 7, 8 people. So I wouldn't look at 12 and be like, man, I'm sucking this season. Nah, you're doing well. Like the loss against me was big, but you're only at -3. So a lot of room to go. Yeah.
We're very early in the season, and there are the kind of how the PR list turned out was who was 1 in this, who was 2 in this, who was 3 in this, who's undefeated. That's kind of how things ended up laying out, and we had to make a lot of judgment calls within that in order to kind of determine how we felt about where to place these teams.
For sure.
And we actually did disagree between the 6 of us. There were arguments over some of these placements, and we did not end up with a clean list where everyone was the same number by the end. There were quite a few controversies throughout, and we had a bunch of decimal points when we made this. So,
for sure. Anybody else?
Yeah, Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, I mean, this team has such potential. It's got really scary threats on it. And, of course, with all the transactions, but I mean, like Sceptile, he's got Altaria, with Cloud9. But, I mean, Burst could easily, within the next couple weeks be climbing up the roster. So, again, since it's so early, that it's like if you have a tough schedule the first 4 weeks, but then we've got like a 12-week plan, it's like, well, I mean, if you lost every single game, for instance, but you won the rest of them, I mean, it looks completely different, right? So I think Burst team has a lot of really cool stuff going for it, and definitely it's just, one of those things with differential and stuff the first couple weeks. But I think with just a few tweaks and really deliberating on the strategies, because sometimes a strategy seems really cool on paper, but it's tough in execution. So you have to kind of have to get your head out of those, because I try to do like really random crazy stuff, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. So you have to really be cognizant of the whole surprise factor versus, okay, what's actually going to get me the win. But I think if Burst makes these calls in the next few weeks, he can easily be getting in the top tiers, sooner than later.
Yep. Matt?
I'm just going to piggyback a little bit on some of the stuff that Ryan and John said. In particular, this game against Dark was actually very, very good. It was very his prep and his play were excellent. He's very, very deserving of this win, and I think that this sort of juxtaposition of the games he had against Maxwell and John here versus the game he had against Dark is a lot of what we saw from him last season too. There were times when he definitely struggled, and then there were times when he really came out swinging and played very well. For those of you who remember season 2, Burst actually ended up taking games off of both Dan and Ryan. So I think I'll say something that we were kind of touching on last season too. If he's able to harness the kind of prep and play that he had against Dark here and against Dan and Ryan last season, there's absolutely a way for him to come back here and bust into the top of the top rankings in Red Division.
For sure. Anybody else? Okay, we will be moving on to number 11, and that is going to be Hector, and this will be Matt and Johnny.
All right, so we got number 11, Hector, with my most hated enemy on the screen there, Maractus. And he's 1-2 right now, and at -13, my lucky number, 13 there. First match against me, which was a fun one, and that's where, we sealed the deal with Maractus there. And then we've got Dark and Ryan, and -5s for both of those. And somehow he got a -3 against me. That was a wacky match, as I'm sure you can hear from still my saltiness. And then Turtonator and Vaporeon there. He did a transaction, Wheezing for Poltegeist and Maractus for Quagsire. So pretty interesting transactions here. So let's throw it over to Matt.
Okay, so starting off with the pros, I think that we've actually seen some good adjustments from Hector in between games. The two, I think the two most notable ones would be against John, adjusting to the Dynamax Maractus in game 2 and 3. That was obviously huge. We've been talking about that for a few weeks now, and that was really what won him the game. And then just another example against Dark, he ended up not going for the self bulldoze in game 1. It sort of cost him. He didn't have quite as much offense as he would have liked. So adjusting to that play in game 2 really definitely helped. Even though he did lose that match, it was put him in a better position. It gave him a lot more offense straight out of the gate. He's also had obviously some good low tier usage with Maractus in particular, especially in the case against John. And his transactions have also helped his team quite a bit too. I think mostly just due to kind of dropping Pokemon that I don't want to say they were useless, but a little bit lackluster on his draft. You see there he had the Turtonator in what is now the Vaporeon slot, and the Turtonator is actually tiered lower. There wasn't. He said during the initial draft there wasn't really anything in tier 3 that he really liked very much, so he went with an X tier 4 instead of a tier 3, which was probably not a great idea, and that ended up being his very first transaction was to fix the tier 4 tier 3 slot, and getting rid of Wheezing too I think was also a good idea. And Vaporeon and Poltegeist add some little bit of diversity to his team and a little bit of offense on the Poltergeist case that maybe he didn't have before. The Maractus trade I'm not quite as crazy about, but the getting rid of the Turtonator and the Wheezing were definitely very good. Moving on to the cons, I noticed in some of his games there's been some situations where his play is not exactly optimal. Just a couple examples of that was like in the game against John, there was a point where he actually could have won the game with a higher differential. I don't know if it would have made his differential positive, but it would at least be better than a -3. There was a point where if he had clicked the Sunny Day and Giga Drain into the Auroras while the grassy terrain was still up, he would have been able to one-shot the Auroras and preserved his Maractus most likely. Maractus went down instead. His game against Dark also in the end game for game 1 and 2, actually, I think he actually had a really good chance of winning if he had just focused down the Chandelure a little bit more, and if he had been clicking Stomping Tantrum on his Dugtrio instead of the Rock Slide. So there are a couple of spots where he could have put himself in a better position to potentially win games or at least improve his differential a little bit. And then I do find some of his Pokemon choice and his usage, or the lack of use of tier 1s a little bit curious. We haven't seen the Charizard come out at all, not even in team preview, and we've seen very little of the Regieleki. I think in the last two games he's played against Dark and Ryan, he's used either 5 or 6 of the same Pokemon. And some of his item choices have been a little bit strange. He's been using a Citrus Berry on the Dugtrio, which is pretty questionable to me. Dugtrio is one of the frailest Pokemon out there. I think it has the lowest base HP stat of any fully evolved Pokemon, except for Shedinja, of course. But you guys can fact check me on that. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that's right. So I'd say maybe nix the Citrus Berry on the Dugtrio. It's not really doing much for you there. I get that other Pokemon are using the Focus Sash, but I wouldn't generally bring Dugtrio unless you have some kind of security on it like that. So I'd like to see a little bit more variety in his Pokemon choice, stuff like that. So John, any thoughts from you? Maybe a few words about Maractus here.
LOL. Well, yeah, I'm just so happy to see it go for Quagsire. I love Quagsire. And I just want to preface to everybody. Well, I guess it's too late to preface because I've talked a while, but Maractus is my most hated enemy. Hector is cool. I like Hector, but Maractus, so I'm glad he got that weight off of his team, because it just look at those eyes. You see that little smiley. It's kind of like 2 M's. It's a little squiggle. It's gonna stab you in your sleep. But I with the tier 1 usage, I do agree, because when I'm prepping, especially for his team, Charizard can be a huge threat, especially in the earlier formats of VGC this past year. With Solar Power, I think that's its ability, Solar Power, and it can put out a lot of damage. And of course Regieleki, you can maybe he's going off of everyone thinks I'm going to bring my tier 1, so I'll bring these and throw them off. But in terms of prep, it's I know that I'm never going to outspeed a Regieleki unless I've got crazy amounts of speed put into stuff. So I usually end up putting it into bulk and saying, okay, I'm going to outspeed his Aerodactyl instead, right? So it's kind of effective, throwing people off, especially I guess with Charizard, if you prep for it. But Regieleki is such a useful Pokemon. I'd love to see it more. But otherwise, all this, it all checks out. He's got great adjustments when he plays. And he just he's got a really good sense of the battlefield. He knows what's going on. He's using his tools really well, even though he doesn't use his upper tiers Mons as much as we'd like to see. But a really, really solid player. And if it just tweaks the team a little bit, it's a huge threat.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback off of what you were saying about the tier 1s and the low tiers, I think it's sort of a double-edged sword, which is why we have both of those things in the pros and cons. Because he's using his low tier mons pretty well, especially Maractus, like we talked about. I think those can those can definitely catch people off surprise or catch people by surprise quite a bit. But at the same time, I think the lack of tier 1s is sometimes maybe not worth the surprise factor that you get with some of the low tier mons, because you're just with his draft, he's missing out on so much of the offense that his draft offers if he's not making use of that Charizard and Regieleki. So there's some good and some bad there.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to say before everybody else, the one thing that questions me the most, you're getting a lot of use out of this Maractus, and you already have Vaporeon, which is already a water immunity. I don't understand why you pick up Quagsire, which is also a water immunity. That's all I have to say on that one. Does anybody else want to say anything?
I think Quagsire is probably more there for bulk and unaware rather than water absorb. But I don't. It's a curious pick to me too.
For sure. All right, moving on to John at number 10, and this will be Hunter and Ryan.
All right, everybody, sit on down. We got to talk about good old Johnny here. All right, so John is currently 1-3 with -4 diff. He's played 4 games, so he has not had a bye yet. He's played Hector, Burst, Dark, and Maxwell. His transactions so far have been Miltank for Fletchender, the Suicune for the Meowstic, and the Mandibuzz for the Mantine. I didn't put it under pros, but I like literally every trade John has made so much. So that was meant to be on the pros thing. I'm just going to put it out there now. Those were great transactions. All of them have been, I think, very helpful to his comp overall. So pros, John is very creative, and not every coach can run the kind of sets he does and be successful. But John has had pretty good success with a lot of the stuff that he has managed to pull out. He's very adaptable. You'll see that John can change game plans rather fluidly between games, and that actually comes in part with his experience. Despite having kind of a weird team in a lot of respects, John has a ton of experience with the game, and it does show in his games. And part of the reason he's actually placed up here at 10th, and why he's one of the top, there's a couple other one in however many coaches, but if you look at his games, with Hector he pulled a win and then he lost. Still gained diff though, so he still apparently played pretty well. Then you got Burst, who he did win against, and then you have Maxwell, who is currently undefeated, but he actually took a game off him. So John is showing that he is consistently able to put out a very strong performance and make a lot of these games quite close, other than the game against Dark King, which we'll go into later when we talk about Dark. Hunter, what else do you got for me? And maybe read some of the cons off that we noticed.
Yeah, sure. So we noticed that his team is a little bit power lacking, and we mean not necessarily by like weakness policy shenanigans or anything like that, but actually I'll get to that in a second. But we're talking about like base stats, and not a lot of the options on his team have the greatest base stats offensively in the world. I mean, he has Rillaboom, which is insane, and then Volcarona obviously, and then Regirock with the weakness policy is really cool. But other than that, like there's not a ton of firepower. Although another con that we noticed was a couple of pretty big weaknesses to a lot of common offensive types, particularly in ice and steel. I think those are the ones we discussed the most. And speaking of big weaknesses, another weakness to his team is he has a slightly linear top of his draft. Like we said before, the Rillaboom, Volcarona, the Meowstic can be a little bit versatile at times, and the Regirock, you pretty much understand what those mons want to do. I would say about 90% of the time, if not a little bit more. And then obviously the other con is Maractus again with Hector.
Yeah, man,
LOL.
he just can't handle it.
No.
I will like to add to the slightly linear top. The reason we put that down there is because John has gotten some of the best low tier mon usage of anyone in the league right now. And his sets are always super fun to watch because he he'll just max an Owen Wilson's Doug trio, and it'll just work, and it's awesome. But part of the problem is that I'm seeing a player who one of their biggest strengths is this insane creativity, and then like there's a Rillaboom, a Volcarona, and a Regirock there that always do the same thing every week. I don't feel like those tier ones play to John's strengths as a draft player as much, even though I still think they're quite good mons. If that makes that point make a little bit more sense. He's had a great season. I'm expecting him to do very well for the remainder of it. Does anyone else have anything to say, including John?
Yeah, so I know you kind of said we'll get to the Dart game. John is one of those players who, in the right circumstance, is probably sitting at 3-1. So the Hector game, we already have Baractus down there. That was just a fatal turn of events. As you see, I mean, he still ended with a +1, and Hector ended with a -3. So if that tells you anything, Maractus really walled him, but he was able to take care of everything else. And then the game against Dark, we've already talked about it before, but the time restraint that he had for this game was incredibly terrible. And you can kind of see that in the game. There was not a lot of optimization from either player, and Dark was just able to pick it up with kind of how his team lays out. So John is one of those guys who could really theoretically be sitting at 3-1. But yeah, that's all I want to say. Anybody else?
Oh, yeah, I just want to piggyback off of all that is, this team is kind of funny because I picked all mons that I have never used before in a draft, which, okay, like the first draft was season 1 of this league, so, there's not too much of a red tape there, but I picked these ones because I like them, and I thought, most of them had versatility, but yeah, if I don't prep really well, or I don't have a certain type of game plan, it does lack that killing power, as Madara Uchiha would say. And it's it's a difficult team to kind of use, but I'm trying to evolve it and work with it and stuff like that. So that's about how that goes. Pretty excited to see how Mantine checks out, or Mantine, whichever one.
Mantine, come on,
Mantine.
It's got an E at the end. I is capitalized. That's the rule, baby.
It was based off anyway.
Yeah,
I know.
Just one more thing I wanted to say about John so far. I actually really wanted to commend you on the weakness policy, Compe. I thought that was so cool. When I saw that, I literally yelled. Okay, like I was so happy to see that, because I think I just thought it was so cool, and I also just love every single transaction that you made. I think Fletchender is great value, and Mantine's really cool. So yeah, that's all.
Thanks. Well, and you'd be happier to know that Doug Trio had Sludge Wave on it, so it would proc my weakness policy with 0 IV special attack. Yeah, I'm kind of a madman. I wish I had gotten to bring that out, but Maxwell got the best of me on that one, So.
Good Lord. All right. Finally, not talking about a blue division coach, we have Hunter at 9, and this will be me and Matt. So Matt, go ahead.
Okay, so I've got Hunter here at number 9, record of 1-2 with a -6 differential. I started off taking a rather tough loss. This is the first of my opponents to appear on this list. I'm wondering maybe if Maractus is listed as a con for John, maybe we should have put Reggie Drago on the cons here. But that's okay. That's okay.
Stop it! Stop it!
Moving on, Hunter had a very solid 2-0 +4 win against Toxic, and then his game against Charles was very good. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of good play on both sides, good prep as well, prep in particular, I think. But he ended up losing that one with 1-2 -3 differential. So as for transactions, transactions is the first pro I have listed here. So I'll start off with that. I think that Hunter so far this season, Hunter I think has had the best transactions in the league. I know a lot of people were really high on the Dusknoir idea in that slot that used to be Amoongus. I really like the Thunderous Incarnate in that slot instead, especially since Dusknoir was available down in tier 3. And giving up Vikavolt for that is perfect because you're gaining an electric type with Thunderous anyway. I think that the combination of Thunderous Incarnate plus Dusknoir is easily better than any combination of Dusclops plus whatever tier 3 you want to fill in that slot. So I definitely got to commend Hunter for that. I really like those two traits in particular. The Behem for the Appleton makes sense. You got a better Trick Room setter in Dusknoir anyway. Part of it was kind of a counter pick for Charles, since he was going to have trouble with the Gastrodon. I don't believe he had a Grass type at the time, so that was good. And then the Raboot for Flareon is a net positive, but I don't think it's really a big deal. Flareon's a better Fire type than Raboot, but regardless of which Pokemon is in that slot, I don't really see them coming very much. But Flareon's better than Raboot at least. But with those first two trades in particular, I really do think that Hunter's had the best transactions so far this season. Moving on to prep and creativity, I think that Hunter so far has showed that he knows when to bring the right stuff, and I think that was fairly evident against Toxic. Bringing the Wigglytuff, for example, I think it's tough a lot of the time to justify a low tier mon like Wigglytuff sitting down there in tier 4, but since it has just a near perfect matchup against Dragapult, just being immune to both of its stabs, I think it was a really great pick. And the physical Thundurus, the Defiant Thundurus, especially as a Dynamax option, just matched up into Toxic's team really, really well. So I think that's a good example of Hunter. Just he knows when to bring the proper stuff, and there's some good examples of his creativity and prep in his game against Charles too. The Dynamax weakness policy thick fat Appleton was really cool to see. Did a lot of good stuff, especially in the first game. I think that was really creative and really useful. And as was the Perish Song on Politoed. I think both of those Pokemon were really good and creative attempts at patching up a bad matchup, because he was going to have a lot of trouble with both the Gastrodon and the Corviknight, and I think those were really creative solutions that offered some solutions that I am not sure I would have seen on his draft otherwise. So props to Hunter for that. Maxwell, you want to continue with the weekly improvements?
Yeah. Every single game you've watched Hunter play gave some improvement. The one caveat is after the game against you, there was nothing but improvement. Just kind of a jab there at Hunter. But no, his game against Toxic was super clean. He played to his outs. And in the game against Charles, it was just a back and forth. Charles ended up just getting the upper hand. I think it was mostly because of Charles, not so much anything Hunter did, because a physical Heatran was out of the realm of what Hunter was actually prepping for. And rightfully so. Like, Heatran is a massive special attacker. Who would actually prep for a physical Heatran? And I think he was able to deal with it relatively well, which kind of shows the improvement as a player as well. Kind of moving down here into the cons is TR mode ? He started the league with one of the best TR modes with a subpar setter in the Behem, and now that he picked up Dusknoir, I'm kind of excited to see what the TR mode can do now. Kind of in turns with that is why everybody was so kind of confused with the Thundurus pick, because he did have such a good TR mode and his setter was subpar. But I will agree with Matt, the Thundurus and the Dusknoir is way better than Dusclops in any sense of the word, because Dusknoir can also be offensive and kind of sweep in that Trick Room as well. And then the last con here is actually Metagross usage. The really mainstay offensive threat that Hunter's been using is actually the Thundurus. Everybody kind of thought it was going to be the Metagross, because Metagross is a huge threat, really good actually in the VGC format. And now you have a way to proc it. You got Shadow Sneak and all that other thing, all the other things you can do with some of the mons you have around Metagross, but you just haven't used it yet. And with Metagross being one of your bigger threats and biggest threats, I would just kind of like to see more usage out of it. But if you don't need it, you don't need it. But that's kind of my thoughts. Matt, anything else before we move on to everybody?
Yeah, I'll just touch on the Metagross a little bit more. I think that it's been a little bit lackluster so far. A lot of that I think is because the Metagross is not maxing as much as I would have expected. As a Metagross user myself, I can tell you that last season, if I wasn't maxing Metagross, I probably wasn't even bringing it. It's pretty underwhelming if you're not maxing it. And so I would say that to Hunter, I would say don't be afraid to max your Metagross with like a Life Orb or a weakness policy. I think we've seen Life Orb already from your Metagross once or twice, but don't be afraid to max it with a super bulky offensive set and just muscle through your opponent's teams, because that's really what it's good at doing, especially when you have the right support for it, which I think you do, especially with Thunderous and Crobat. Crobat, which we also haven't seen yet, but I think it's an excellent partner for Metagross. So I would say maybe go in a little bit harder on the Dynamax Metagross mode.
For sure. Hunter, anything from you?
Yeah, I just the Metagross usage is definitely a great in Faircon. I just thought that there were better options in the weeks that I've played.
For sure.
And I mean the match against Matt is just no excuse. Like Dynamax Metagross was kind of nice. I just didn't really play the best in that match, as you guys can see. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think everything else was fair, and I appreciate the nice words.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, we will be moving on. Next is going to be Jess, and this is going to be covered by me and Dan. But because I don't want to say anything negative, I will actually start it off. Jess is sitting at 1-3 with a -7. Opponents are Dan, Matt, Dina, and Toxic, picking up a win against Toxic for the first win of the season. Transactions, so Valley for Rhyperior, then trading the Rhyperior for Togetic, dropping Kartana for Stakataka, and then dropping Ensign for Landorus. You can kind of see a very big rebuild, kind of like Burst is doing. The pros, she has been very creative. You can just see from the match against Dina and then the match against Toxic, the Slowbro has done 30 things in 2 games, and it has been absolutely hilarious to watch. And then she is also drafting in a new play style. That was one of her big goals this season. She did relatively well winning season 1 and then being, I think, top 4 in season 2. And she just said, hey, let's try something new. And I think she's doing that. And you see like big losses to Matt and Dina. But I think her play has been very phenomenal, seeing that she is rebuilding a team that she was already not familiar with. So Dan, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Jess had really rotten luck with the schedule. If you look at the divisions we have laid out right now, and you had to pick within a division the three hardest opponents you could play back to back to back, picking either division and any 3 people within that division, it would be her first 3 weeks. So she had the single toughest first 3 weeks in the league, very likely, and I think that exploited a lot of the initial weaknesses of her draft, but that's also a bit of a double-edged sword if you think about it, because it showed her what the weaknesses in the draft were, and better that she sees it now than sees it in weeks 8, 9, and 10 when she can't fix it. She sees these initial weaknesses, and she's taking these steps to fix it. So I think her schedule is a bit of a con in terms of her current record and putting her in a hole, but it's also a pro in that it showed her exactly where the flaws with her team are and what she needs to do to try to build her way out of it. So overall, I think for Jess, the biggest problem was the schedule, but that's also going to be the biggest blessing in the long term when it comes to building and fielding a competitive team come playoff time.
For sure, for sure. Anybody else before we kind of wrap up Jess and move on? Okay. Moving on, we have Dark with Matt and Ryan.
Oh, okay. So this one is where things get a little weird. I will be blunt. 7, 6, and 5 were the most hotly debated placements for this PR list. And when I mean hotly debated, Dark, if you're listening, I was driving to Iowa and I spent like 2 hours trying to figure out where to place you and the other next 3 coaches.
Real quick, Ryan,
it was
I have
very
this.
tough.
I have the stats. They are separated by less than a point.
Yep. It was very close. So just know that these next three, I think, really could have been in any order. There was a lot of discussion that occurred over these ones, and all of these coaches are doing quite well. And Dark's placement here is a little strange. So I do want to talk through part of why that is. So if you look, Dark's record is 3-1 at +9. That's the highest differential so far, and actually one of the highest diffs in the league right now, which is pretty great. He has a 2-1 win against Grant with a +5, 2-0 win against Hector with a +5, 2-0 win against John with a +3, and a loss to Burst. That was an 0-2 -4, and he does not have any transactions. So I do want to talk about pros first. Firstly, and I think you'll appreciate this, Dark, if you're listening, your comp performance has actually proven itself. I was one of the people who was very skeptical of his comp not having the power or the tools necessary. I just felt like it might have been a little underpowered for the current format. He has very much proven me wrong on that. I think his comp is performing really, really well for him, and I don't really have any complaints about the composition as a whole. I think it's been really good. His sand mode has just been phenomenal. I mean, that Drake's ult with the Hippo was absolutely the right call. It's worked really well. And something I've noticed throughout all four of his games that I wanted to mention as a huge pro that I don't see a lot of other people in this league do a ton of, his protect reads have been on point. For mid and late games, he's been very good at predicting when opponents will protect, when they'll switch, when they'll not protect. He's very good at that risk reward calculation. Now, big wins I have in an asterisk, so there's a reason for that, because it is both true and false. So his 2-1 win against Grant was a +5. However, that game had a game 3 that occurred because of a disconnect and an inability to recreate the circumstances right before the game DC'd. If that game had gone according to how it was supposed to, he would have had a +1, which is notable. Now, that third game he did play was extremely good, and he got a huge win and obviously ended with a +5. But it's notable that there was a circumstance there that gave him that. The Hector game was, in fact, a +5. He just had a really good game over Hector, very impressive. And that's kind of part of the reason why the big win is very genuine. And against John, he 2-0'd. But that game, firstly, it was rushed on both sides because there was very little time to prep and play for that one. And second, it was an RNG fest. The +3 is kind of insane. That game as a whole, while Dark and John both played it extremely well, it was not a huge consideration to an extent because of the RNG and timetable it was placed under. So those are kind of why he got placed here, because the next coaches above him have all had bye weeks, like the next two have both had bye weeks. However, because of some of the circumstances regarded in some of these wins, and there was just a lot of discussion about where these chunk of coaches should be placed, because it was very difficult to tell. So I'm going to let Matt kind of come in here and talk for a bit. I've been talking for a while, sorry. And he can talk about some other things that have been going on here.
Okay, so yeah, I'll just cover the cons here. The first one is I think the one that's probably the most obvious to all of us, is that for the first 3 weeks, Dark was using roughly the same team. I believe he for week 3 he switched out one of his mons for a Scizor he had in his box from season 1, if I'm remembering that correctly, which is obviously not great if you're using the same team over and over. You know, it's very easy for your future opponents to prep for exactly what you're doing. To be fair, he did build a new team for Burst. Unfortunately, that is where he took his one loss here. I don't think we should read too much into that. I think this is one of those situations where correlation does not equal causation. So I don't think that's the reason at all for the loss there. But yeah, it's obvious why you don't want to do this, and I'm hoping that this building a new team for his fourth match here continues into all of his other matches. It's if he continues to do a lot of the same stuff over and over again, he's going to become a weaker contender, and I don't want to see that from him, especially since he has such a good starting record here. Next on the list is Ally Switch. He's been relying on Ally Switch quite a bit, especially with the Uxie. A few of us have had a conversation about that mon in the server, I think, a few days ago, and I'm of the opinion that Uxie has a hard time being useful, especially in Trick Room with that 95 base speed stat, unless of course it's clicking Ally Switch, and I think Dark's been leaning on that a little bit too much. It screwed him over a couple of times, especially in game 2 against Burst. The Burst knew that he was clicking Ally Switch on Uxie all the time, and predicting that Ally Switch was kind of the final nail in the coffin in game 2 against Burst. So I'd like to see him maybe switch things up a little bit, whether that means taking the Uxie out a little bit more often, or using some different moves on it. Whatever, you can still use Ally Switch sometimes. I'm not saying just ditch it entirely, but it's I think it's coming out more than it should. And then the last one, he's had a little bit of he's had some issues, I think, with Pokemon targeting and move optimization. To me, the most prominent examples of that were when he sort of left the weakness policy boosted Duraludon and Venusaur from Hector and Grant. He sort of left those on the field a little bit longer than he should have. So I think maybe those are just a couple of examples, though. I think that move optimization and really addressing the threats on the opposing side of the field is something that he might want to take a look at going into his next few games.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to say one thing, and it's like it's just a big bet on the back to Dark. I was one of the people in the original breakdowns that was severely doubting the Hippowdon pick, and I just wanted to say it has definitely proved its worth. And also, I don't know if you guys know the GIF that I'm talking about, but that you guys know that Moto GIF where he's like raising his eyebrows up and down. Yeah, that's been sent between me and Dark at least like 10 times over the last few weeks. So I just wanted to say, yeah, good job on that, Dark.
Yeah, and I think I broke this down at one point, but with his sand mode compared to mine, because everybody was like, oh, he's throwing, not picking Gigalith, like Max was going to grab it. He picked it because if he would have went Gigalith, both Mons were weak to ground. So no, I do. I like that out on.
No, I do too now, definitely.
Moving on, we have number 6, Charles, and this will be Dan and Ryan. Whoop, too far.
Yeah, absolutely. So Charles has had a pretty interesting season so far. He had the week 1 bye, which we should 100% abolish. That should no longer be a practice in this league. It is abhorrent in the year of our Lord 2021 that still exists. But beyond that, his first match was against Toxic, where he 2-0'd, got a +6. Then he fought me, where he lost 0-2 with a -5, and then he beat Hunter 2-0, 2-1 with a +1. That should say 2-1. But Charles has had a really interesting season so far. His transactions, the Orbeetle to Eldegoss is actually Eldegoss to Orbeetle to Eldegoss. So he just cycled through Orbeetle for a week just so it was on his team for 1 week and it would receive the trophy at the end if he wins, I imagine. He dropped the Licky and picked up the Manectric. I really love that one. Picking up the Manectric gave him the Lightning Rod redirection. Dropped Naganadel for Latios after our match, which really helped out his ground weaknesses because he was very ground weak pretty early in the season. Same with the Heliolisk for Heracross. So overall, I think his transactions were very solid. Looking at his team, generally speaking, I said great transactions. His prep has been really great, and so have his reads in the 2 matches that weren't versus me. And I don't really think that was a hidden problem in those matches. Like I think overall he's been playing very well through all 3 matches, had a very solid game plan going into them, and I really expect good things out of Charles. And now that we are back in the blue division, I'm gonna pass this one on to Ryan real quick.
Yeah, so firstly, when I talked about specific prep choices and callouts, I've noticed that for his game against Toxic and his game against Hunter, he talked a bit about why he did the things he did, and they were very specific, and there were some good callouts too. I'm a little brain dead because I've been out of town, so I can't think of the specific examples, but I remember he called something particular on Hunter's set that Hunter would do that he was correct about. He also called out something Toxic was going to end up doing. And I've also noticed in game, his reads have been very solid. So he's made really good reads, especially that set against Hunter. I think he actually won that off a couple of good reads, some good calls out and some switches, things like that. In terms of the cons, some of the inexperience he has hurt him a bit. I think that mostly sticks out in the Dan set that I saw. I think a little bit of that inexperience, not being as much a doubles player and more single player, and he's a little rusty because he's been out of it for a while, has kind of taken him a bit to get back into the groove of things. And his team did take a while to settle. This is very similar to Burst, where his initial draft wasn't quite what he wanted it to be. So it took him a while to kind of get things in a position that he wanted them in. But the transactions were really good, and I think he should be a lot happier with where he's at now after these 4 transactions. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to say one thing. I just want to commend Charles again for the transactions. I think they were extremely solid. And I'll give you 2 examples. So against me, I had the Thunderous and Rain mode. So 2 of my main modes were shut down by 2 redirectors on his team. He has the Storm Drain on Gastrodon and Manectric with the Lightning Rod. And I thought those were extremely solid. And on top of that, the ally switch on the Latios pickup was one of the main reasons why he won, along with the physical Heatran, which is just another commending factor I want to give to Charles. His prep, like I've seen in his pace and his videos and stuff like that. I think he's just been extremely solid. That's pretty much all I want to say. Oh, also, you made a mistake giving Ryan Licky. But you know what? The Manectric pickup was good, so I'm not really upset about it. But yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, moving on to number 5, we have Dina, and this will be me and Hunter. So Hunter, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So Dina's sitting at a pretty comfortable 2-1 plus 1. Even with the loss to Dan, she picked up 2 pretty good wins against Toxic and Jess, and with the bye at week 4. And her transaction actually was really, really good. At first, I wasn't really fond of it, but then after reading into Articuno, the Galarian Articuno, I realized that it's great for Tailwind, and it can do a lot of really cool offensive things. So just going into a couple of the pros here, one of the bigger pros that I noticed were her in-game adjustments, and particularly against Jess. That game really, really impressed me with her in-game adjustments with the call on the Incineroar specifically, and the adjustment to bring the Rotom Wash in the next game, to adjust for the potential adjustment that she knew that Jess was going to make. It's like a whole thing. And another thing that I really wanted to commend Dina on was her team's speed tiers, and I think her speed tiers are great. Great versatility with the speed tier. She's got great trick room options with the Runerigus and stuff, and then she's got the Cinderace, she's got the Noivern, she's got the Articuno. She's got really, really good options, and I just wanted to give her credit for picking those up and realizing that. So go ahead, Maxwell, on the cons.
Yeah, so these cons are actually a little weird. Me and Hunter kind of struggled to put these cons into words. So the first one we have is diversity, and this kind of comes from the 3 games that she's played. I think there's only been maybe 7, maybe 8 at the most mons that have been shown. And when you're prepping for Dina, you know you're going to have to deal with certain things that just kind of have to come. And that kind of goes into the next con here with the lead options. If I'm not mistaken, all of her lead options have been Cinderace X or Clefable X. And knowing that those two Mons in tandem are probably going to be a lead, you can kind of counter lead pretty heavily if you have, of course, the correct tools to do so. But those cons are kind of just there. They play a part in her team. Like, if you can't deal with Cinderace Clefable, you're probably just going to lose. And I think she has a great draft. Like Hunter said, the speed tiers are great at the top end, bottom end, and some decent middles like Rotom Wash. And just seeing her play, because I've played against her in another league, the adjustments are just phenomenal. And being able to read, like Hunter said, adjustments from the other team. And it's fantastic. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll say one thing about her game against Dan. I was impressed by not so much her Pokemon choice adjustments, but more. I mentioned this in our breakdown when I talked about this game, but she led the same thing in game 2, but just adjusted her play a little bit to deal with the Primarina a little bit better, because that Choice Specs Dazzling Gleam thing Dan had going on was really good for her Follow Me Nasty Plot setup. And the way that she adjusted to just get rid of the Primarina instead of like sticking to her mode too rigidly was another another good example of an adjustment on her end.
Yep. Anybody else?
Yeah, I will add in throughout the season, I've been impressed with a lot of Dina's play. One thing I would really like to see more from her is more support sets. It seems like everything that has the option of running offensive or support is almost always on the offensive. Specifically, I would like to see Will-O-Wisp come out a lot more from her. Like, I think that's a very strong tool in a variety of matchups that she's been underexploring, giving her mons that have access to it.
Yeah, I actually think she brought it against Jess, just never clicked it.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, we have number 4, Ryan, and this will be Dan and John.
Wow. I mean, Ryan, he's 2-1 +4. First week bye, went up against Maxwell. Week 2, then Hector, then Grant. He had the Drifloon for Licky Licky, his MVP, as you can see on the screen there, with its long tongue out and its upside down Wi-Fi symbol. Man, and words really can't express just how great Ryan is. I mean, it's good stuff. So, what do you have to say over there? Who's with me? Matt?
No, I am.
Oh, Dan.
Dan.
Yeah,
Yes.
Dan, what do you got to say?
Yeah, so I'm going to go through some of the cons for Ryan, because I think these are things that he can really improve as a player, and I'd love to see him grow in this league. Maybe one day he will gain a single iota of skill, and when that happens, I think this league as a whole will get a lot stronger. First off, his league card. The league card is really like trash tier right now. There's not much else you can say about it. Like,
Agree.
he needs to learn how to beat the game. Like, before you feel like you can come into our house and play VGC draft, you should learn how to beat Sword and Shield. Like, it's not that hard, but I believe in you, Ryan. You can one day achieve at least that. The second thing I want to mention is the ability Lightning Rod redirects your own Thunder Waves. That's actually been a trend throughout the league, not just for Ryan. This one's a bit of a more serious note, but I think that the fact that this is a con speaks to the level of play he's actually playing at, because we are focusing in on one bad play on a single turn in one game, which it really threw that game for him. But like, if that's the one play that we're focusing on to meme on him about, like, then that tells you that he's had a lot of pretty consistent high-level play, even against pretty strong opponents. And the last thing he really needs to work on is the power supply for his housing and the surrounding areas to make sure that he's always available for games. Because if he's unavailable to play, like, we don't want you to have to take a forfeit, Ryan, but, you know, like, if you got to dig the own lines, if you got to get some hamsters on a wheel and plug that into the grid, like, you got to do what you got to do to make sure that you have internet and power available. First off for Pokemon, and second off because air conditioning is really nice in the summer, and it is in that order.
Look, man, I live in Tornado Land. I don't get options. If I put the hamsters on the wheel, they'll just fly into the tornado and be in Wonderland.
Use a potato instead.
Ooh,
Yeah.
good idea.
Real quick. You notice as we get higher in, it is harder to kind of talk about some of these teams because they're higher up. They've had stellar play, so the cons are going to be more fun and happy-go-lucky with all of us. And the pros are mostly going to come down to they're a great player. With that being said, does anybody else have anything to say about Ryan?
He licks.
I do, in
Yeah.
fact, lick.
He does, and it's a few things. Of course, it's kind of synonymous with all of these top four. But I mean, just a great sense of where he wants the game to go. Ryan gets into the game, and after a few turns, he knows exactly what he wants the end game to be, and that's a really tough thing to do in the midst of battle, is to say, not worry about like the little turns. You always in for that. I mean, even when there's like very obvious kills or something like that. I mean, Ryan has a really great grasp of what he wants to do, and oh my gosh, I mean, the sets that he comes up with are amazing. So it's good stuff going on there. Wish the league card was better though. I only say that, I put that on the slide because I spent like 15 minutes working on my league card, and I beat the battle tower to get the gold background. I just want to see some more effort from the league cards, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, just saying.
One more con I do want to say is Gigalith is not base 30 speed. Moving
Yeah,
on.
that's facts.
Oh.
Real quick, I do want to put this in a video so at least Charles knows. Because Charles, so the Licky Licky, I was A, never planning on picking it up, and B, I did not know it got Bellydrome until I played Grant. So that was what it was. I'm just putting that out there. That was not intentional.
All right, fair enough. Moving on to number 3, we have Dan. This is going to be me and Matt. So Matt, go ahead.
All right. Before we start off this one, I'd just like to tell Ryan, beat the 4th gym. At least the 4th gym.
Look, man,
Anyway.
my Quagsire is struggling.
That's no excuse. Anyway, Dan is one of our top competitors here. He's sitting at a record of 3-1 with a +11 differential. He picked up some pretty good wins. I think the ones against Dina and Charles were particularly decisive. The one against Jess was there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of good play on both sides. Kind of came down to the wire there, but he did pick up a good win, a 2-1 +2 win there, and then taking his first loss this past week, again in a very, very close game against me. So and then he's made his first transaction just recently, dropping the Colossal for the Azelf, which I kind of like, even if just because I want to see somebody use Azelf. Maxwell, do you want to take us start us off with a couple of pros here?
Yeah, so Dan's speed options have been phenomenal. You do have that Tailwind mode with the Tornadus. Also, you're just kind of middle of the road, so your opponent really can't set up Trick Room unless they have a dedicated Trick Room mode. And even if they do, it's going to be hard because you do have some of those really slow options. Your offensive modes have been phenomenal. Mainly the Mon you see on the screen here, Primarina. It has been so underrated, I think, in a lot of coaches' eyes, and you've really used it. Not mine, because it swept me in another league, but that is different. Versatility and balance has been so good. You see in your prep that you know what your Mons are going to do, and you can kind of bring out some weird things. For instance, when you play Jess, you didn't click it, but you did have Surf on the Garchomp for the Colossal, which I thought was super cool. And then you're just consistent. I mean, you are number 3. You can't be number 3 without being consistent. So Matt, go ahead with your con.
Well, before I get there, I would like to emphasize a couple of these pros. I find this team to be his draft to be incredibly well balanced between the especially his top picks, the Garchomp, Tornadus, and especially the Primarina and Arcanine being two very versatile components of a fire water grass core that can function both offensively and defensively. I would have liked to see something more like that for his grass type, but Tangle is it's something that he's accustomed to. It's a very good defensive piece. Redirection is always great. I'm not going to complain too much about that, just because it's not quite as balanced and versatile as the other two pieces. But the Primarina and the Arcanine work incredibly well together, I think, and mostly just because of his post commentary. I find his play to be incredibly consistent and thoughtful. He's able to assess many different variables all at once. He's aware of what's going on the field, and you can really see that in the way that he commentates his battles after the fact. So props to Dan for that. Very, very good play. As for the cons, the first one, I was excited to see Kaparaja get drafted this time. It hasn't really had much use in this league, and I thought that might change this time, and I'm still hoping it does, but we haven't really seen enough of it. We've seen it in team preview, but I think that's about it. I don't think it's actually hit the field on Dan's side, which is a shame, because based on some of the videos and pastes I've seen from him, I think he's building it absolutely correctly, and I think it's a very good addition to his team. I think he's putting it into the right matchups with the right kinds of sets. I'm very appreciative that he invests in the defenses instead of the HP on a Pokemon with this kind of stat spread. It's all coming together, except it's just not hitting the field. I want to see the damn thing on my screen. That's what I want. Kaparaja is an excellent Mon, and I would like the rest of the league to see that. On a more serious note, the only con I can really think of is something that I've been bring about a little bit for a few weeks. I do wonder with this draft, since it is more balanced rather than a more offensive draft, I do wonder if there are times when Dan might have an issue justifying the Tornadus being there as a Prankster Tailwind piece. Typically, you want some pretty extreme offense to go along with that. I can attest to that, being the Tornadus player last season, especially with Metagross. But I wonder if that might sort of pigeonhole some of his more balanced Pokemon into being more offensive when they might not want to be super offensive all the time. I think you might have seen that in this last week in particular with the choice band on the Arcanine. And I may be wrong about that. There may be situations where he's still able to build some of these Pokemon in a more balanced way, rather than just forcing them into offensive roles every time. And maybe the Tailwind is still good enough to be filling a slot there on his team. But it's something I wonder about, and it's something to consider, I think, in the future. So Dan, any thoughts on your season so far, or responses to anything we've said?
Yeah, I think the Tailwind question is really interesting, because the most important thing for me with Tailwind has basically been to allow Primarina to attack first whenever I've been setting it up to Dynamax, which has been pretty frequent. The Primarina is averaging 3.5 kills a week right now, and I think a lot of that is because I am putting in a position where it does have the ability to attack first, but I can also see the argument that the Tailwind isn't necessarily needed with the Primarina, Garchomp, and Arcanine, because I have been playing with a tendency to get the good defensive switches as well, instead of just that plain hyper offensive strategy, which can waste turns of Tailwind, which in turn may devalue the Tornadus some. So I could definitely see that either way.
Okay. Anybody else on Dan?
Yeah, one thing. Dan is like the king of character design and style, and I just wanted to say that his character looks so good in game. I love the way his character looks. That's all I'm gonna say. And his lead card's pretty cool too. I just want to give you a little bit of credit for that.
I approve.
Anybody else? Okay. Moving on, we have myself at 2, and this will be Hunter and John.
All right, time to lay it on you guys. This is the one and only Izzy Max. I just hit my table. I don't know if you could hear that, but oh man, undefeated so far, 4-0 plus 20, 420. Coincidence? I think not. And we've got Burst, his first week, plus 6, 2-0. Ryan, 2-0, plus 7. Grant, 2-0, plus 5. And then John coming in with the upset, that piece of shit, 2-1. What? Plus 2. And so far, we've got some transactions. Good stuff. Glaceon for Mr. Mime G. Kling Klang for Malhuile. Good stuff. You can see the fish on his screen. Wow. What do you have to say, Hunter? Ooh, we've done it.
Johnny, I love you, buddy. Dude, I can't. Okay. So one thing that I've noticed about Maxwell over these 3 seasons of the MDL is his in-game adjustments are about as good as you get. I think that he's come back from, I don't actually have the exact number, but he's come back from like being down 0-1 to winning 2-1. Plenty of times over the last 3 seasons, and that's not a surprise to anyone, just because of his amazing adjustments, and that comes with experience too. One pro that I think that Maxwell has over a lot of people is how versatile his draft is, and I'm not saying there's not versatile drafts. Obviously, they are. I just don't think any draft is as versatile as Maxwell's is. And Maxwell, these are a bunch of mons that he's never played with before, and he's performing amazingly with them. So I just want to give you a little bit of credit there. And you know, like with the sand mode, and then with Dracovish and Gigalith, and then he's got the Lele, and he's got the Howlucha. It's just, oh my gosh, there's so many different options on his team, and the multiple strong modes like I just mentioned. A lot of the pros, like they all contribute to big wins, which is something that I think Maxwell has had not really a hard time with achieving, I guess. I think he's had a lot of really, really big wins, particularly over the one over Ryan. I think was probably the biggest win here. You know, the 4th ranked player being beat 2-0 plus 7. I mean, that's about as incredible as you can get. I mean, so I just want to give credit to Maxwell for that win, and all the other big wins that he's gotten so far. So moving on to the cons, we had a pretty hard time coming up with cons for Maxwell's team. So one of the cons that we kind of came up with was not really a real steel type there. I mean, Malwell, yeah, of course it has the steel typing, but it doesn't really have the bulk that you really want for a steel type. So I think that's kind of a con. Not necessarily a huge one though, it's just a little con. And then the other con that we noticed was the schedule keeping him out of number 1. And this came up in the chat when people were voting. A lot of people decided to not put Maxwell 1 because of his schedule. I want to say quote unquote difficulty from a PR standpoint, from the rankings and the standings and everything like that. We thought that the schedule, like I said, from a PR ranking was worse than our number 1 coach, which is why we have a 4-0 plus 20 differential player, insane by the way, at number 2. So that's pretty much all I have to say.
Anybody else before I talk?
Yeah, real quick. I just want to comment that just that I'll go into some nitty gritty on our top player in terms of why they were the top player instead of this one. Outside of the Charles, Dark, and Dina placements, first and second were the most hotly debated after that. There's a lot of discussion about this. So just a heads up, I'll explain why things ended up the way they were when we hit the next slide.
Anyone else? Okay, so I am very impressed with kind of the Mon choices and how they work together really well. Like Hunter said, I went into it thinking I'm not going to draft anything I've used before, and it has been very impressive. My key aspect was just drafting things that synergized really well with each other. Of course, you do see the Dracovish here working really well with the Gigalith, and I think I did it against Ryan, where I kind of bluffed the sand mode, and it turns out Dracovish was just Choice Scarf with Strongjaw, doing a metric shit ton of damage to the Registeel, which would otherwise just completely wall me out. And yeah, just every piece on my draft has a role, and it's been doing its role relatively well. So yeah, last call. Okay. Our last one will be Matt at our number 1 slot, and this will be Dan and Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got Matt at the number 1 slot. He's 3-0 and plus 15. So if you look between him and Maxwell, they are both undefeated. Matt has had a bye, but they are both averaging plus 5 each week. I think Ryan and I are both going to touch a little bit on why one was 1 and one was 2, and it was a very close discussion, but their differential per match is exactly the same. Maxwell does have a single game loss, whereas Matt does not, but that didn't really play much of a factor into it. But overall, what we determined, the 6 of us, looking at both these schedules, because they are in different divisions, we wanted to look at the opponents and the division overall. And if you'll notice, in the blue division ended up with numbers 1, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 14, where the red division ended up with numbers 2, 4, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13. So far in this season, we think the blue division just has been just slightly on the margin stronger than the red division. And because these two were so close, like that was basically the deciding factor, is that Matt has done this in a slightly harder division. But moving on to Matt himself, the transactions absolutely hate the Diggersby for Mamoswine. Not that it was bad for his team, but Diggersby is the best meme in Pokemon, and it's very upsetting that it's not on his team anymore.
Agreed. Preach.
The Rapidash for the Audino, I don't exactly know what the tactical reason was for that, besides spiting Hunter. So there's one reason to do that. And then to quote Matt specifically, he made a transaction 2 weeks in a row where the thing didn't even come in the team preview before making another transaction. But I believe that one was more tactical because it was lining up the Passimian to be on his roster the week he played me, and I do have some fairly strong Intimidate options on my team. So I believe that was more of a tactical decision, even though his team is 100% Intimidate proof outside of Grimmsnarl. But overall, I'll do a couple of the pros, and I'll let Ryan hit a couple of the pros and the cons as well. Matt's prep is always great. He recognized that Purloin was a good bring in our match because it had priority Sunny Day. So to counter it, he had Scarf Pelipper with Rain Dance to reset the rain quickly. Honestly, that was not in my prep at all, and I'm very sad it never got used, but that's my favorite piece of prep out of anyone so far this season. And he also shows a lot of adaptability and a willingness to change up his strategy from game to game, and even within the game itself, switching between offensive and defensive minded pretty seamlessly, which allows him to consistently play to his outs, even in games where it doesn't look like he should win, to identify a potential path to win and follow that path and hope that the opponent opens the door enough for him to walk through it. So overall, I think Matt has had a very solid season so far, and I expect continued great stuff from him. But I will pass that on to Ryan real quick.
Yeah, so Matt is playing outside his comfort zone here a bit. He's playing a different style of team than he usually does. Matt tends to draft balanced teams, pretty through and through balanced teams with redirection and those kind of specific modes. This season, he's kind of dipping more into I don't know if I'd go as far as to say hyper offensive, but more of like a mixed team. Definitely something we haven't seen from him before. He is adapting through sets really well. That's something all the top 4 have been doing. And it's part of the reason why that is a point that keeps getting brought up, is that your ability to adapt determines your ability to win in games. And Matt has done a really excellent job of that. I think his games against both Dan and Jess really showcased that. And Matt's very good at playing to outs. That mostly only came up in the set against Dan, but it's worth mentioning because I think that was the only time he really had to play to an out. There are some cons. So low tier usage. Matt, there's this fun thing. If you have a new Pokemon every week, I don't get to see if it's any good or not. So, figure it out. Have something be the same that it should be, and then it'll be fine. The other thing is that, ketchup, it is an okay enough condiment. You don't have to hate it so much. I would have liked to have seen Salazzle do something, because it's like kind of cool. You use Sock, but I haven't seen Archeops very much, and he's a boy. Also, that Regidrago in the corner, I did not add to the slide, and I don't know if Dan did or not. It just kind of appeared there.
No, I'm pretty sure Matt added it to his own slide because
Okay.
that's who he is as a person.
I didn't delete it because
That checks out.
I felt wrong if I would have. I just want to comment that was a meme not placed by myself. So that's about it. Dan covered the first and second place pretty succinctly, I think. So I don't feel a huge need to go over that. I will say it was close, though. There are very good arguments for both of these. I actually advocated for a tie of all things, but we ended up just sticking with the averages because that made more sense in the end. But that is how the cookie crumbles. So if anyone else wants to comment, they can.
I actually have a question for Dan. So Scarf Rain Dance was more interesting than Explosion Mind Blown to counter Trick Room?
Yeah. Scarf Rain Dance was on a Mon that has Drizzle. Yeah, that's more interesting.
All right, fair enough. I just wanted
That is a lot
to
more
ask.
interesting.
Sorry, go ahead, Maxwell.
I was going to ask if you had anything to say, so go ahead.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, on the Scarf Rain Dance thing, to be fair, that was not originally my idea. I took a page out of the old Alex Agloza playbook.
Mm-hmm.
He had, in 2014, he brought Scarf Polytoad with Rain Dance to reset the rain after Charizard Mega Evolved, so that's where I got that idea. I suppose I'll just respond to a couple of the things that you guys mentioned. The catch-up thing I will leave to Ryan and I's next hot take video, so stay tuned for that.
Thank you. I have another 45 minutes.
Yeah, I don't want to ruin this with a bunch of catch-up talk right now. So we'll get to that at a more appropriate time. Regarding my transactions, the Passimian, my team's not exactly Intimidate weak anyway, so it wasn't like I was just drafting that to deter Intimidate. I think that was more like that's more what Dina was trying to go for with the right before she played Dan with the Galarian Articuno trade, because she had stuff that was actually weak to Intimidate. I was more just curious about what that would do to Dan's prep, and interestingly enough, he ended up running Flash Fire instead of Intimidate on his Arcanine. So that was just interesting to me. It didn't really matter all that much, especially because I think the only physical attacker I actually had hit the field against him was the Grimmsnarl. But to be honest, I decided on Cursula in that slot like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So the Passimian was always meant to go.
I was sad.
Yes, I'm
You
sorry.
Me literally 2 minutes after you made that transaction, and you were like, "By the way, I'm dropping Passimian next week," and I was so depressed.
You seemed excited about it, so I wanted to prepare you. I think aside from that, I've enjoyed playing with this team a lot. I'm among the small group of players here who's drafting something different from usual. I felt like I had the luxury of doing that since it wasn't. I didn't feel like it was quite as crucial to do extremely well again, since I had a championship under my belt already. I've actually been surprised by how well my team's been doing and how well my mon's been working. Been having a lot of fun trying out new stuff, and I think so far what these first few weeks have just been kind of they've been kind of the first chapter in my my season 3 journey, and I've mostly been getting my bearings with this new team and just sort of trying out what a lot of these mons do, and getting a good feel for them. And now that I've actually had a chance to use most of them, I'm hoping that I'm going to have a little bit more freedom in the coming weeks, or perhaps toward the end of the regular season, to switch it up and use some stuff that's a little bit less standard, and maybe a little bit more wacky. I can't make any guarantees, but that's sort of the direction that I would like to go in after sort of playing some games enough to figure out how most of my mons feel. So I'm looking forward to doing that in the coming weeks.
Okay, that's gonna wrap it up here. Does anybody have any final words before we all sign off?
Yeah, real quick. Just these PRs are also difficult to make. In some ways, they're actually quite harder than they're the hardest ones we do. The preseason PRs, we just average what you all send us. The late mid-season PRs that we're going to do here in a couple weeks are usually pretty clear-cut, and it's more about who's making playoffs, who's not. These are always the most challenging, and they're also the ones you should probably take with the most grain of salt, in my opinion. I think the preseason will generally have pretty good notes on what's going on with your team, and a lot of people usually fix their team or make changes after those. However, these are usually the ones that are proven wrong the most, in my experience. So I did want to throw that out there for everybody.
Yeah, and unlike last season, the bye week has made things very weird.
Difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're fixing this for next season. We have a plan.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Should I talk about the giveaway?
Oh, go ahead, John.
Cool. Well, actually, before I talk about the giveaway, I have a really bad joke.
Yeah.
What don't you want your Pokemon to do while you're in the shower?
What?
Pikachu.
Oh my God.
Oh man, it's even worse. But anyway, for week 5, I think we're going to be doing the pair Shelmet and Karast from that was summer of 2011, and they come with the ribbon that says "The Cherished" when it throws out. But yeah, there's they're in Cherish balls, and it's Shelmet and Karblast from way back when in Generation 5. So I think we're going to pull those up, and one winner from Red Team and one winner from Blue Team, as we did with the Zigzagoons. So we actually just got the Zigzagoons today. So there's some lucky owners out there. But yeah, so that's the giveaway, is Shelmet and Karblast is kind of a showing of, I know there's a big rivalry between Blues and Reds and all this. And, hopefully the two winners will trade them and evolve them into their final forms. And, then we can all kiss and make up, and it'll be a good time.
All right. Anybody else?
Figuratively, of course.
Oh, yeah.
I would just like to say that I know there was a little bit of talk about this little Dragon Ball down here in the corner, but I would just like to say I cannot confirm nor deny whether I am responsible for its placement there.
Good.
Means it was Matt. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So without any further ado, we will abide back into our relative conferences until week 6, 7?
Week 6 or 7, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. We had 6 people all on one call, and this went relatively well. So we'll see you guys again next time. Peace.